So welcome everyone. Welcome to the Pearl Harbor Aviation Museum's webinar series, where we talk to a range of people and about a range of topics: aviation, aeronautic innovation, World War II Pacific theater history, and more. Thank you for joining us this Hawaii morning, wherever you are in the world. I know we have tons of people visiting from all over. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome again. My name is Ashley Dort, and I will be working this webinar today. We also have a few museum educators behind the scenes working to make sure that we answer your questions. If you have anything about our museum that you'd like to know, let them know in the chat and the Q&A function. I want to make sure everybody is alerted that there is a chat and a Q&A function, and we will be able to get to your questions in time. You have all sent in many questions, and we're going to try to get to as many of them as possible today. We'll be listening to Colonel Dahl today, and yeah, let's get started. We are joined today, as you all can see, by two fantastic individuals. We have with us right now, we have our moderator for today, Mr. Brad Ball, president of the 475th Fighter Group Historic Foundation. I believe I got that right. Is that correct?
That's absolutely right. It's quite a tongueful.
It very much is. Yeah, so I'm going to ask you to take it from here, and then you can welcome our guest speaker. I'll be dropping off, and then we can get started.
But ladies and gentlemen, I can't thank you enough on behalf of the 475th. And thank you, Ashley, for all that you have done getting ready for this and your great team. Ashley is going to operate content and slides. She's my wingman, but I was told she's our wing person. And what we're going to do is take you through PJ's story, and PJ is going to be a big part of telling that story, a lot more than I'll be talking. I'm also privileged to be a member of the Pearl Harbor Aviation Museum Board of Directors, which gives me an opportunity to be up front and close, even though I live here in Southern California. But PJ Dahl, as you know, is one of the most distinguished P-38 pilots, even going back a number of years. He's the oldest living P-38 pilot with the largest victory record, sitting at 9 victories to his credit. And as Ashley said, with your kind interest in this program, we have more questions than we do have time, but we're going to try to race through those, but also share the story on how the 475th came into being. Yeah. You're staring now at our Satan's Angel, the name of the 475th Fighter Group. It had the distinction of having 3 different squadrons: the 431st, 2nd, and 3rd. Hades, Clover, and Possum were the monikers of those fighter groups. PJ was part of the 432nd. And I'm going to show you all a great picture of PJ, sort of then, very much then, in the lower right. Hope you can all see that. He's proudly has his foot on the nose wheel of his bird, the 162. And right next to him, of course, is the 23 Skidoo. We're going to tell you that story and how that name came about. PJ's had the chance to be in more than one P-38, and that's part of today's presentation as well. We're going to keep moving this forward now as we tell you that this particular story is going to take you back to, we all know Pearl Harbor rather intimately. Certainly everybody at the museum does. And you know, maybe not our youngest viewers today, which is something we hope we can help people realize the importance of. But there isn't as much clarity about why there was such ferocious battles in the South Pacific. The Japanese started their aggressive actions back in the 30s, recognizing that if they were going to wage war, they needed the natural resources from the Philippines virtually all the way down to Australia, whether it was coal, rubber, lumber, iron, minerals, anything that you would imagine would go into the manufacturing of the weapons of war. And in that aggressive action, they overtook most of those countries all the way down to the tip of New Guinea. What we're going to do right now while we get PJ's picture online is I'm going to look to ask Ashley run a video. You're going to see PJ. He's put a number of videos together in his career, and we'd love to have you see this short story on the kind of the overview.
My name is PJ Dahl, Colonel, United States Air Force, retired. I was a member of the 475th Fighter Group, and I flew 187 combat missions in World War II, flying P-38s. Shot down 9 aircraft, air-to-air battle. The 475th Fighter Group was formed in Australia in May 1943. It was the only fighter group in this theater to be completely equipped with the P-38. It was also the only fighter group during World War II to be entirely activated in its area of responsibility, the Southwest Pacific. Its members came from within the theater, as well as replacements from the U.S. In April of 1943, just a month prior to the activation of the 475th, the Japanese launched a 100 aircraft strike on Port Moresby, New Guinea, on the very doorstep of Australia. The Japanese forces were steadily pressing south. To thwart their advance, it was imperative to gain, or at least localize, aerial supremacy. The only fighter available at that time with the range and capability to accomplish this mission was the P-38. For the first time, our bomber aircraft were able to strike enemy bases and shipping with fighter cover. The primary mission of a fighter group is to destroy enemy aircraft. Every individual in the 475th Fighter Group was dedicated to that mission. The pilots of the 475th Fighter Group accounted for 551 confirmed air-to-air victories and enjoyed a kill ratio of 11-to-1. The ground crews worked long into the night to get the aircraft ready for flight the next day. They performed under the most difficult conditions, with no permanent structures and limited power tools and equipment. The group flew 24,701 sorties and produced 43 fighter aces. That's pilots who registered 5 or more air-to-air victories. It was the first fighter designed to fly over 450 miles an hour. This airplane replaced the P-39 and the P-40, the best fighters in the inventory at that time. Not only did they have trouble matching the Japanese fighters, but they did not have the range required to fulfill mission requirements in the Southwest Pacific. When the P-38 came on the scene, the air battle rapidly turned around, and for the first time, the Americans were able to hold their own in air-to-air combat with the Japanese. The Zeros were much more maneuverable, but the Americans employed tactics to take advantage of the P-38's superior speed. Also, the firepower of the 4 50 caliber machine guns and 1 20-millimeter cannon firing 900 rounds a minute, that was unmatched. Having 2 engines was also a big plus. The strategy of slowing the Japanese offensive by striking their bases and shipping required long overwater flights. While engaging the enemy hundreds of miles from home plate, it was reassuring to know that if one engine was shot out or failed for any reason, the other one could bring you safely home. We went down through the overcast, but when we broke out underneath, John Loisel and myself were alone. We'd lost the rest of the squadron. And there were Zeros down there. I mean, there were, I don't know how many, 30, 40 of them. We were right in the middle of them. I looked up in that rear view mirror, and an ME-109 type, we call him a Tony, was right on my 6 o'clock, and he had me. What I did, just instinctively, chopped everything on the right side, the engine, right side, full right rudder, full right aileron, and the airplane almost cartwheel, if you will. But I lost probably about 150 knots of airspeed right now, and it kind of spun around and everything, and this guy slid underneath me, and I looked down, saw him, and he roared away, and I brought the other engine back up to speed, and we darted home. But the good Lord provided the best airplane for that theater against that particular enemy. A lot of airplanes that came out later in the war, they were superior, but none of them could have done the mission in that theater that we did with the P-38.
PJ, that story, no matter how many times I've heard it, continues to put the hairs on the back of the neck straight up. But what that really represented is kind of the broad overview of what we want to talk about today. And I can tell you PJ, you signed up at age 17. You weren't even finished with high school. And while we can't see you, we can sure hear you well. Tell the audience a little quickly about your transition from that high school sign up to when you actually got trained to fly a fighter plane.
Well, I was 17 when I joined the infantry division, the 41st Infantry Division, which was in the state of Washington. And a lot of us kids joined the thing, so we would train over the weekends and thing. We'd just train on weekends, and we'd get enough money so we could buy gas on our little jalopies and things. And prior to the declaration of Pearl Harbor area, the unit was called to active duty, and then with the Pearl Harbor, of course, we were on active. They activated the outfit, and I went to Fort Lewis, Washington, with the 41st Division, where I had to finish high school, going to night school at night in a little town called Tacoma, which is right next to Fort Lewis, Washington. And after serving there, I went on to aviation cadets. That's a little bit of a summary about how I got into the flying business. But let me just say one thing: I have nothing but the job and the bravery and of an infantry man, infantry personnel is something else. And I did run into my infantry unit over in BIAC when I was flying there, and I went and visited them, and they'd lost over a third of the outfit. So I was not very good in the infantry. I can tell you that. Maybe at 5'5" was a problem. The gun weighed almost as much as I did that I had to carry around. But anyway,
didn't you tell me that you had to use, at least on the training planes, not the fighters, that you had some challenges reaching the pedals at your height?
Well, two things on that. First of all, in order to get an aviation cadet, after one of these infantry maneuvers at Fort Lewis, I was slogging back in through the rain and everything. And the next day, the first shirt called us in, that's the first sergeant, said, if anybody can pass 2-year equivalent of college and pass the rigorous physical needs, you can apply for aviation cadets. And that's when I did that. And one thing, I think you had to be at least 5'5", and I was stretching that. And I think you're supposed to weigh about 125 pounds, and I was down about 115. So before, when we got down to Santa Ana, all the guys got, and they pulled on my legs, and they gave me a pound of bananas to eat. And I inched through, being tall enough and enough. But the only problem I had of being that size was in the Vultee vibrator, which is the basic airplane I flew, and I had to carry a couple of cushions to put behind me because of pedals. I couldn't reach the rudder pedals without it. But the rest of the airplanes, I managed to get by with okay.
Well, as you have proven and history has recorded, you were 6'10" once you got into the seat of a P-38, PJ, and it really made a difference. Actually, if you'd advance the next slide, I'm going to tell a quick backstory, and PJ and I are going to go back and forth on questions we've received. And let me just frame the story with the next slide, please. Everyone knows December 7th, the Japanese launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, and that surprise attack took its toll not just on the lives lost and the bulk of our battleships and destroyers, but our hangar, where the museum is located today, still has all the bullet holes and strafing marks as evident, since it's literally next door to the Arizona Memorial, as Ashley said, right on historic Ford Island. Next, please. When it looked as though our back was against the wall and the Japanese clearly had the upper hand, they'd been preparing for war since the 30s. It was the Doolittle Raiders that really boosted the morale of the world and the U.S. when the Doolittle Raiders went off the deck of the Hornet, and in April of 42, dropped bombs, more than anything to say to the Japanese, we can reach your homeland as well. So tit for tat. Along comes the Battle of Midway. The Battle of Midway, our incredible Navy and Marine airmen sunk 3 of the 4 Japanese carriers in 5 minutes. Most people know that story, but it began what was called the turning point, although we still had unbelievable battles ahead from Guadalcanal, etc. And the war now was starting to rage even more with greater intensity as the attention started turning to what is going to happen if we don't stop Japan. Japan was on the doorstep of Darwin, Australia. All they had to do was to jump off from the tip of New Guinea, and now Australia would be threatened. Next slide, please. PJ, this is going to serve up a question. Of course, you mentioned that we had the P-40 and the P-39. That was sort of the base fighter planes that we had in the Pacific at the time and down in New Guinea and those parts of the world. But just how ferocious was the Japanese Zero?
Brad, a couple of things, if I may comment on your comments regarding the threat at that time. The Air Force at that time, the Army Air Corps at that time, just had the P-39s and the P-40s there that's the best airplanes we had in that theater. And the Japanese were, as you said, were just they went down into Port Moresby. They were threatening it. Their infantry was just in the mountains there. And the big problem with the P-40 and the P-39, not only could it really contest the Zeros and the 20s so well, but they didn't have the legs to accompany our bomber strike, so we could get at the Japanese forces, the bases, so that we could eliminate some of their bomber capability. And as a result, when the P-38 came online for the first time, we hit these Japanese bases, and the war turned in a heartbeat. I credit that to the P-38.
To the 38. Well, as you said, to have that ability to escort the bombers with the primary mission was to eradicate the air bases, all of the Japanese supply. It took the right aircraft and the right trained pilots in order to accomplish that mission. In fact, Rob Moore, a shout out to one of our board members, asked the question. The P-38 first saw its combat duties in Europe, and PJ, you and I talked about this, but it didn't really have the success. Can you quickly comment on why that was the case in the case of what the British thought of the P-38 and its capability?
Well, I can't blame the Brits. The initial airplane, the P-38s we turned over, Lockheed was asked to build an airplane to go 450 miles an hour, and they did that. The only problem with the initial ones they made, I don't know if they're P-38A or B or whatever it was, but they sent a gaggle of them over to Europe, but they didn't have any turbochargers on them, and they were real dogs above 20,000 feet, and we were doing all our fighting, more like 30, 35,000 over there, and as a result, they just turned the things back to us and said, "Thank you very much." As fate would have it, they returned those airplanes to the field where I did my advanced training, Williams Air Force Base near Phoenix, Arizona, Tempe, I think. And they brought those airplanes back there, and they redesignated them RP-322s for some unknown reason. So, and it was a P-38, except we had no turbochargers on, and the props didn't counter-rotate. They all turned the same direction. Other than that, they were the regular P-38 as far as long as you're low level. And that's the airplane I checked out in my advanced training. And they didn't have any back seat, and they you weren't able to have an instructor with you. So you just got in the cockpit, and the guy made a few instructions and says, "Go." and off we went into the wild blue yonder.
So you went up in a multi-engine rocket ship without any instruction. You had some instruction on the ground, but you had to have the skill to figure that out. That's the ultimate on-the-job training, is it not?
Yes, and you know, we were pretty well along. I mean, we did advanced, primary and advanced training. So we, you know, we're familiar with airplanes. And
Sure.
things. To be perfectly frank, the airplane was a very, very easy airplane to fly.
Well,
But if things went wrong, baby, you better be quick. If you lost an engine on takeoff or something before you get single engine speed, you're on the deck. You know. But let me reiterate, as far as the Brits were concerned, not wanting the airplane. I can understand that at that time, but ultimately we got a squadron. I think we put them in North Africa and one also up in Britain. And they did brief when they talked. A Luftwaffe pilot was shot down, and he designated. He said the worst airplane he went up against, or the most scariest one for him, was the P-38 when we did accompany those B-17s. Incidentally, if I may, the B-17s. We're early on going over there, and they were doing daylight bombing. The Brits with the Lancasters were doing the night bombing, and I mean they were losses from the B-17s and the B-24s. We were filling up their POW camps from these guys, and then until we finally came along with initially the P-38 and then the P-51, which came later, which also had the range to go in where we could accompany those guys. But I have nothing but admiration for the bomber pilots, and I would mind talking about it a little bit later.
Yes, that's fabulous, PJ. And you touched on the Luftwaffe's opinion of the 38 over in North Africa. That's where the phrase "fork-tailed devil" was credited to, the nickname they gave the 38. It was the Japanese that actually had two planes, one pilot, as how they referred to this aircraft because of its twin booms, twin engines, and so many guns. Let's go to the next slide, and we'll take us back to the other side of the ocean again. On the cover is General George Churchill Kenny. He was assigned by Douglas MacArthur, to figure out how in the hell to create a fighter group that could take on the duties of escorting the bombers and fight against Zeros, Zeeks, Oscars, all of the firepower that the Japanese had, and which were, as PJ said, superior to the P-38, the P-39 and the P-40. Kenny, by the way, was a World War I fighter pilot and then was very deeply involved in the building of war aircraft with the Air Force leading up between the wars. So he was not only qualified, but he was not going to take no for an answer. And he knew that if he could get the best of the P-38s, they made 19 different variants. They just kept improving them. If he could get the very best P-38, that would be the answer to the escorts and to taking care of those Japanese bases and resupply. But there was a problem. You had to have enough qualified people to fly. So as he came on board, he realized he was the head of the 5th Air Force. And what he did is he rated from his fellow 5th Air Force fighter groups the very best, the top ranked. It would be like every NFL coach finding out that one guy could pick the top player on each team. And that's what he did. And he mixed those top fighter pilots into what was to become the 475th, along with new recruited individuals like PJ Dahl. And PJ, you mentioned something about the first time you and your buddy found out that they were going to the 475th, and what did, I think it was Joe Forrester that had the comment about the young and old. What was that story?
Well, as you said, General Kenny, he just screamed the joint down for P-38s, and I think he made many trips to the Pentagon and so on to get those airplanes over there. And they did. They got the best pilots they could from the 39s and the 40s to get a little training cadre there at Townsville in Australia. And I came when the outfit left Australia and went to Dovadur, which was the first base we had for the 475th. To get Joe Forrester, who was my age, and he was all white haired for some reason and premature.
Nice hair though, huh? I like white hair.
when he and I landed at Dovadora, we reported to the group commander, and he said to his intelligence officer, he says, looked at Joe, and then he looked at me. He says, "My God, they're sending us old men and kids." And so that was our reputation over there. Anything else you need now?
Well, let's cut to the next slide, and I'm going to have Ashley in just a second roll a 30-second video on the P-38, and we'll let you tell just a little bit more about what it was like. No, you're correct. Go to the next one, and then you should have a video that you put in, a 30-second video right here on the P-38 video. Nope. PJ, why don't you talk about the characteristics of flying this plane? You know, it had a yoke versus a stick. That was one of the questions we received. Well, PJ, just trying to imagine you at the controls of a P-38 is impressive as it is, but you were sure in charge. And one of the questions was, why a yoke versus a stick? Why a sort of a steering wheel versus a stick? And why don't you just give us a quick answer on that, and also about the firepower?
Well, I can't. I have no idea why they put the yoke instead of the joystick in there, but except to say this. It could accommodate more buttons because it had on the yoke, you had not only the radio button and the drunk tank buttons, you had two buttons, one for to fire the 50 caliber machine guns, and one to bring in the cannon. And I think that's all is on the steering wheel.
It makes sense. It's like the steering wheel on a Formula One car. All the controls now, other than turning, are on that steering wheel. So that actually is a great answer.
Yeah, and also, strange as it may seem, this airplane, it was indestructible as far as you're trying to tear the thing loose with pulling too many G's. I can remember when I finally got into jets, they were limited to something like 3 Gs. This thing, you'd pull 10, 12 Gs with it, you'd black out with it, but it wouldn't hurt the airplane a bit. And having two hands on the wheel gave you a lot more strength to do that. It just gave you more control, having two hands on that control rather than just one hand on a joystick. So I think maybe that was another good thing.
Well, this next slide kind of shows one of the important duties that you guys had. Next slide, if we can, Ashley. And one more. That's a beautiful shot of the squadrons. This is Amberley Field in Australia, where you guys you can look closely. These are 38s, either being assembled, reassembled, or otherwise, very early on before the formal start of the 475th, which was May 1943. So the war was well into its duration when the 475th finally got into action. Next slide, if you wouldn't mind. But as PJ said, the biggest assignment was to eradicate all of these countries, starting in New Guinea and working the way all the way back to the Philippines, of the entrenched Japanese forces. The number of and this was rugged terrain. These are B-25s that would skim across the water 25 feet over the surface of the water, attacking the transports with all of their resupply and whatnot, as well as troops. And these skip bombing maneuvers were very successful, but they never would have got there if the 38s didn't help escort them up and down the coast as they were doing their mission. Quick next slide, if you don't mind. I'd like to give a shout out to one of a couple people right this minute. This is none other than the grandfather of one of our board members, Craig Taggart. His grandfather, Vincent Elliott, had 7 victories. And Craig is a third generation member of the 475th, and we're honored to have him, and along with the legacy, since our foundation has so many family members still active and involved with so many activities that we've conducted. Next slide. Good to see your grandfather, and this is none other than Pete Madison. Pete Madison, the father of our current chairman, Chris Madison, and the grandfather of David Madison, also a third generation member. Pete was the co-founder of the 475th Foundation along with PJ. And the two of them, you know, as many veteran groups did after they came back and started their new lives and so on, felt it was necessary to stay connected. And under his and Pete's tutelage, PJ and Peter, they went ahead and put together not only the foundation and helped everybody send in artifacts, but it allowed them to build a collection, but most of all to come together under reunions. For 50 years, reunions were held up until the last 2 or 3 years when it was just not possible for those that would be able to attend. In fact, I'd like PJ to tell a quick story on this next slide, and I just want to point out on the next slide. Here we go. This is one of those low strafing runs that the 38s did along with the bombers. And you can see in the upper left-hand corner, upside down P-38. Well, that happens to be piloted by Pete Madison. PJ, what happened? What would cause him to do a roll like that at this altitude?
Okay, I'm gonna make it real quick and sweet. Both Pete hadn't been, this squadron happened to be commanded by Tommy McGuire. He's a second leading ace. And one thing he was very reluctant to do when we got in a combat situation was to drop tanks too early. The airplane does not maneuver well with tanks. And
those are the drop tanks. I don't know if you can see what I'm holding here. I don't think my camera's on, but if you were to look at this, a typical 38 underneath, you'll see those 2 bulbous tanks. That gives them the extra fuel, the extra range. Sorry, PJ, just wanted to qualify that. There was combat airplanes in the area that, and he didn't want to drop tanks too early. And when he went in, Pete just didn't, with the drop tanks on, he couldn't pull out fast enough, and his tanks just ripped through some of the riggings up there, and that flipped the airplane upside down. And he flew it back okay. He lost 1 engine, but he flew it back okay, and he landed successfully, and he lived to tell about it. Okay. Well, then, and that's how Chris grew up knowing that story, why he became so active in his late father's work, and we're very appreciative of both of our third generation members and the entire family. This was quite a harrowing experience. Next slide, if you would, please. Now, PJ, you had some interesting experience, so we're going to show a real fast clip. But what you're looking at on the picture on the left is Colonel McDonald, and one of our board members, General Rick Richardson, asked a question about is there a connection between the 475th and Pearl Harbor, December 7th, and the answer is yes. This happens to be a picture of Colonel. With McDonald with none other than Charles Lindbergh. Picture on the right is with Tommy McGuire, as PJ said, the second highest ace in either theater of World War II. But McDonald was one of the few people that got off the ground the morning of December 7th to fire back at the Japanese attackers, as did another member, Harry Brown, who was the first. He shot down, and I know that people on our board will be interested because we're in the process of acquiring a Val, one of the torpedo bombers of the Japanese attack, and Harry Brown was successful in downing a Val, VAL. So we want that to be part of our collection at Pearl. But most importantly, on this story, we're going to segue to a quick video to talk about Colonel Charles Lindbergh's role flying with the 475th. Thanks, Ashley.
Sometimes some unusual people performed with the 475th. One special person showed up in July 1944 and flew with them through August of the same year. Colonel McDonald thought this unusual person was familiar to him, but he did not think it could be the person that stuck out in his mind. That person was Charles Lindbergh.
PJ, I know you didn't fly directly with Lucky Lindy, but you did tell us two important stories. The first was something about how he helped extend the range of the aircraft.
Yes, that was the most important thing Lindbergh did when he came over there. He was doing something with the Navy airplanes, I think, before he came to us. But I swear, he's flown everything. I told everybody, I think Charles Lindbergh could fly the crates that the player come in. He was really a good aviator. And he jumped into our airplane without any problems. And P-38, if you're at all experienced a pilot, I don't care what you're flying, it was a Cadillac of the any airplane we had in the inventory at that time. And what he did, he devised a way. We were always sweating fuel. All fighter pilots do. But even today, the jet age, the first thing you do in a jet airplane, you take off, the first thing you do is looking for a tanker to get some fuel. So we were always sweating fuel. And he came in and he pulled by reducing the RPM to 1600 RPM, no matter what manifold pressure you're pulling. I know it's getting a little complicated here, but doing that, we didn't, we went on a mission and we all came back. This was nothing but a practice mission he was flying. And he was flying with the 433rd Squadron, so I didn't fly with them. But he came back and they tore the engine down. Nothing wrong with the engine. And because everybody said we were going to load it up. He had 150 gallons more fuel than anybody else. So all of a sudden, our range went from something like 800 miles or something to I flew almost a 1,200-mile mission from Clark Field in the Philippines to Saigon, very, very late in the war, where I had 11-hour missions. And we had 2 fights at that time. I shot down 1 airplane at that time, too. So praise the Lord, he extended our mission, but we weren't always all that heavy. Having and knowing that we could, we'd plan a lot of missions to go over 10, 12 hours.
PJ, I can't even drive to Palm Springs without taking 2 stops personally, so that's hard to even fathom. PJ, tell us, one of the questions was, how big a role did faith play in your day-to-day thinking as you were into these remarkably ferocious dogfights and everything in between? And secondly, tell us about one of your many close calls.
All right. If I may, Brad, go back to your second question regarding.
Yes, I knew you wouldn't miss a beat, PJ, because this is an important question.
you know me, I never saw a microphone I didn't like, and I love to tell stories, and I never let the truth interfere with a good story, incidentally. So anyway, I just happened to be at the Officers Club, a little thing we had there, when Lindbergh came in, and he mentioned somebody. He said, "Who likes to go fishing?" I raised my hand. I jumped on that like a duck on a June bug, because I lived up, and I've always had a boat all the time. Even when I was 16 years old, my folks got me in boating. But anyway, so he showed up. He said, "Oh, I'll meet you some such time." Well, the next day, I showed up by on the beach, and we put on jungle boots, because the coral, we had to go out through the coral and protect your feet. And he showed up. I thought he was going to show up with a couple of fishing rods, but in a little boat. And he showed up with a little inflatable and no fishing rods, but he had a little box of something and things in there. So we jumped in, he and I, and went out, and with another gentleman, by the way. And we went out and waded out through the coral reef until we got on the drop off, and went out a little bit, got in the boat and paddled out deeper water. And he opened the box, and no fishing gear except hand grenades. So he pulled out a hand grenade and threw them things over the side, and off we went. And we went down, and the other fellow and I, we'd go down and grab a couple of dead fish floating around, and get up and throw them in the boat. And we looked down once, and Lindbergh was sitting at the bottom, had one of his boots off, and was loading, putting fish in there. he was really in good condition. And, you know, he was 20, 30, 40 years older than we were. But anyway, that was my experience with Lindbergh, and quite a gentleman. Again, he could fly the boxes they came in, I'll tell you. He was a hell of an aviator.
Well, and so could you. And I know from our relationship and friendship over the years, you have had some, you've been given multiple chances. Your skill still speaks for itself, but it does take some luck to not be one of those sad victims of aerial combat or mechanical failure. Which one of your many experiences on that comes to mind?
Wow. You know, I always tell everybody, I shot down 9 airplanes. I only lost 4 P-38s, and I lost them all in weird ways. I really don't know how to describe that, except I could go into detail about a couple of them. That's a little unusual, but suffice it to say, one of them, I just made a mistake. I got caught in bad weather, and I had to make an emergency landing on a strip that was completely all weathered in. It was high noon, and it was they were driving around on there with our lights on. I came around and landed the airplane. What I thought was I got a green light from the little tower they had there. I threw down the gear, went downwind over the base, flaps gear on the final touchdown, and it turned out that green light was not just for me. It was for a B-24 that was sitting on the end of the runway, and it was for him to take off. And he and I met. He was going one direction and I was going the other, and we were nose to nose. And I just looked up and saw him. We were on PSP, pier steel planking runway, just slick as anything, covered with 6 inches of water. And I just kind of gunned one engine and a little bit of rudder and went underneath his number 1 and 2 prop. And the airplane turned around, and I still doing 80 miles an hour backwards. And it went down into the gully. I got up and scrambled out of it. And that P-38 went to P-38 heaven right out in the bay. And that was, I guess that was a little scary. But they were all scary.
Wow. And maybe quickly, I know you had another incident, which is just almost hard to imagine, but you were involved in a midair right in the middle of a fight.
Yeah, this was up in the Philippines. We were stationed up there, and Colonel McDonald called me one morning. I was operations officer, and he said, "PJ, you got a heck of a good mission tomorrow. The Japanese are bringing transports and all the stuff down into a little town of Ormoc, which is at right the south end of Leyte Island. And the Japanese had quite a base there and an infantry station all up and down the middle of Leyte. And we're going to put the B-25s are going to come after them, skip bombing and strafing. And they need cover because Segu, the little island, Cebu, a little island close to there, was loaded with Japanese airplanes, and they knew that the Japanese were going to be coming over to protect their shipping. So he called and he said, "PJ, that's going to be a good mission." He said, "Would you mind if I fly with you?" And, you know, Colonel asking the captain. I said, "Yes, sir." Of course. I said, you go ahead and you get Clover Red leader, take the first 4 airplanes, and I'll be in lead Clover White flight, and we'll have 2 other flights behind us, a total of 18 airplanes. And we took off real early in the morning. I got over there, and I'm speeding this thing up. Colonel Mack called in. He said, "Doggone," he said, "they didn't properly refuel my airplane." He said, "I'm going to have to go back and get some gas." And so he took off, went back. I said, "No problem with that. I'll take over as Clover Red leader." So I did. I went in, and I saw a flight, a squadron, about 18, 20 Tonys. That's the ME-109 version, the Japanese version of the ME-109. And I kind of coming underneath an overcast. I went up on top, dove down behind them as they came out underneath the overcast. I went up and knocked off lead. And then I was just turning. At that time, we had a J models. We had a dive flap, turning flap, maneuvering flaps, they called them. And I was maneuvering with him, just about ready to line up and get my next one. And all of a sudden, from going from 400 miles an hour to zip, bang, I had a midair collision. I looked up in the rearview mirror, and I looked out, and both tail booms were gone. And then the right engine fell off, and fire came over my cockpit. And I thought, this ain't my day. And I could look over and almost see home plate, but I had no wings or no boom. Anyway, the thing blew up, and I went out with the fire, and I got badly burned. I was right over the Japanese Navy, and went right down through the flak. And I got in my little dinghy, and to make a long story short, 2 days later, I was arrested. I landed, washed up on the beach on the east coast of Leyte Island, correction, west coast, where the Philippine guerrillas were fighting. Fortunately, I got rescued there after a little firefight they had with the Japanese patrol, and I stayed with them for well over a month. And they got overrun when the Japanese finally made a big landing. When we made a landing at Ormoc, the Japanese all infiltrated into the AO of our area of operation, and we dismissed and had to get in the jungle. I survived in the jungle for about 3 weeks without any food or water, and I had a monkey that they gave me, and I was all nursed back to health by then. I got home, I weighed 100 pounds, and that's as short as I can make that.
Well, you did great. 2 quick questions. One, our friend Denny from Racine, Wisconsin wanted to know, did you have a name for that monkey?
Yes, well, the little town that we fought in was named Ormoc. And while the guerrillas brought me back when they rescued me there, they had a regular squadron, battalion set up with a hospital and all the rest. They were survivors of the Bataan death march, where they came out of Corregidor, had escaped from the Japanese, and they fought that.
And they
bathed my wounds with sulfur that MacArthur was supplying them, and boiled coconut oil, and nursed me back to health. And one little incident, when I did land there, I would have been out in the water quite a while, and I was suffering from shock. And when I landed my little dinghy there, I went to run up a trail, and there'd been a fight there. The Japanese patrol and the guerrillas were carrying on a battle. And I went up the trail about and took off all my insignia. I don't know why I did that. Turned my boat over. And somebody was coming down that trail, and I jumped off the trail a little bit with one of those banana leaves things right in front of me. And the guy stopped right in front of me. And again, to make a long story short, I was getting pretty faint, so I took my 45 out and put it in the back of his head, and I squeezed off around. The only problem was we had ball ammunition, and we had also we had birdshot in ones, and you could not put birdshot into the clip and work it. So always before takeoff, I would put a birdshot one in my in the chamber, and then if I needed to kill him, but I'd just pop that thing out, and the birdshot would go out, and I'd have a slug in there. Well, I'd forgotten that, and when I went out in the water, all that thing opened up, and all the birdshot ran out. So when I shot this guy in the back of the head, all it did was hit him with a wad of paper, and all it did was piss him off. And make a long story short, while they nursed me back to health, this guy with a big old straight edge razor, he was shaving me and everything, and he's around my neck with that big straight edge. He said, "Do you remember me, Captain?" I said, "No, I sure don't." And he said, "Well, I'm the guy that you tried to blow his head off with that 45. So,
well, I think the name of that monkey I was asking you about, his name is Ormark, by the way, and for our audience. And so, PJ, you also have something that Colonel McDonald had to say about the number of P-38s you lost. What was that story?
Yeah, after that mission, incidentally, the guy that was shaving me also was the guy that presented me the monkey. What they do over there for the monkeys, they go out in the woods and they shoot with a shotgun up there, and whatever monkeys fall out, they cut their tail off, and the domestic, and that's what they did with this Ormoc. And let's see, the other question was?
Well, there was, I think, at last count I was keeping track, you had lost 4 P-38s.
Yeah. After I returned from that escapade, I came back. I was rescued by a PBY, and a little tale about that. But anyway, when I got back, I went and checked in with Colonel McDonald, and he congratulated me on rescuing and coming back on. I weighed a little less than 100 pounds, and he said, "Okay, PJ, let's see. Now, how many P-38s have you lost?" And I said, "Well, sir, I've lost 4 now." And he said, "Well, that's something." He said, "You know, you lose one more and you'll be a Japanese ace." You know, so that was a little insulting.
PJ, if we could advance the next slide. Thank you. This is great, and I know Ashley's going to tell me we're coming up to the hour, but we're going to continue this because we've got so many questions, and those are the folks that can continue. I'm sure we'll love to hear the responses. You're looking at Richard Bong on the right, on the left there, talking to none other than Thomas McGuire, and the two of them have the distinction of being the top 2 aces of World War II. Richard Bong flew with the 475th on multiple missions, but McGuire his entire time, and they went on to have the highest number of victories in the war. And then Colonel McDonald there on putt-putt, I think was well within the top 5. So you can see that General Kenny was absolutely correct on the people that he rated from his own Air Force, if you will, to get the very best of the best, to get the results they needed and to put in their hands literally the best fighter airplane that could have been possible. I'm going to stay on this slide. PJ, we have so many questions, one of which was, here's a real fast answer now, PJ. True or false, what's the better fighter, the Oscar or the Zeke?
Well, what's the definition of better? The Oscar only had 2 small 30 caliber machine guns. It was very light. It was very maneuverable. It was ultra maneuverable. And the Zeke had more armament and was a little bit heavier, but had much more armament, and but it was not nearly as vulnerable as maneuverable.
So you'd rather go up against that Oscar, it sounds like.
Yeah. Well, I got most of mine were Zekes because that Oscar was like trying to catch a fly with your,
with your hand.
Yeah.
Wow. Now, PJ, one of the things we noticed on many questions is we have 2 people that wanted you to know that they actually flew with you, and who didn't you know, given your incredible record. One is Richard Putt, P-U-T-T, as well as somebody's uncle, Ronald from California's uncle, Don Gordon, also flew P-38s and 51s in the Pacific. And I just wanted to acknowledge that. Not sure if they're on the video route with us today, but we also wanted to mention that we've talked about this, working on the boards, and anybody involved in working with our distinguished veterans know that maybe the biggest challenge outside of what these veterans sacrificed and did is to keep the legacy alive and to keep what you did in moving forward. I think you've been surprised when you've spoken to school groups, even how people recognize what this is. I remember some comment you made about you were being asked to tell the students what you could about World War XI. And, when you hear language like that or questions like that, you realize just how little of this history is being shared. That's certainly a huge mission of the the Pearl Harbor Aviation Museum in Hawaii, and people like Ashley who lead, people like Elisa Lines, who's the executive director and believes in that, and it's a big part of what we do there. If I can, I'm going to keep going through some of these questions though, because what people do want to know is what it was like to fly, and you touched on that. What is it like to, actually shoot somebody down? Because after all, that's, these are just people doing what they thought was right for their country. And you shared a story with a lot of us about, what that meant after you got back to your base and thought about what had happened. And you think about that today, talking about people that you actually defeated in air-to-air combat.
Well, the one thing that I think you're referring to, because you and I've discussed it with you and in other interviews, I was flying out of New Guinea, and intelligence people called in and said that there's a destroyer, Japanese destroyer, collecting intel evidence, and they wanted to locate it. We'd put some B-25s or something on them, and I went out with just a wingman and a lot of monsoon season, a lot of buildups, clouds. And I looked down and I did the spotting finally between the clouds, and I was just jotting down some coordinates on it and stuff. And right in front of me, as I broke out of the clouds, right in front of me was a Zeke. And I was right at 3 o'clock, and he darted right into a cloud. I know he didn't see me. And I cleared my guns real quick and went in right through that cloud. And of course, you couldn't see your hand in front of your face going through those clouds. And then when it broke out a few seconds later, there he was right ahead of me. And I lowered the boom on him and blew him all up. And I know to this day that kid never had a chance to call or anything. He was dead. That airplane blew up, and I was so close to him. I pulled up, and I had to fly through a bunch of the debris, and he knocked the uplock on my right main landing gear off. So that when I brought the airplane back, I couldn't get the gear down. I could get it down, but not locked, and the right gear collapsed on landing, and I had to, ruin the airplane. But since that time, I've thought more as become more of a devoted Christian. I might add, all during the war, I carried a little Bible with me, and I will admit I was not very religious per se, but to this day, I wonder how that the commander of that young man who I killed, how the commander wrote to his mother back in Tokyo or wherever and said that her son has not returned from a mission, and we have no idea what happened to him, because I know he didn't have time to make a phone call. So,
well, PJ, I don't want to embarrass you, but I think people can sense your humility, the amazing life you have led. I wanted to also, without leaving this off, and we're still going to continue our conversation, that you lost your dear wife, Bobby. 80 years the two of you had a life and marriage together, and I know she was on those missions with you back then, or certainly throughout your life, as well as what we call an honorary member of the 475th, and we think about her. I also was going to mention that you have that humility and are kind of looking forward without the time when you're not going to have everybody say you're just the best, PJ. Man, there couldn't have been anybody else like you, and you're quick to share that the credit of what you all did and the sacrifice of so many that didn't make it. And I think you have a limerick about that, about the difference between a bomber pilot and a fighter pilot.
Yeah, it's two things. First of all, I have nothing but admiration for the bomber pilots, and all during the flying training, we always felt that the top numbers in a basic training, which is what you did before you went to fighter, before you selected the combat airplane that you're going to fly. We always felt the top spots always went to the fighter pilots. So we always felt that we were a grade above bomber pilots, but God bless them. They took such losses over in especially with the B-17s, B-24s over in Europe. And so I have nothing but admiration for those guys that had to fly bombers. But we always felt that fighter pilots. And so the only limericks I know I know the bomber pilots, they flew with a co-pilot, a flight engineer, navigator, a bombardier, and all those kinds of things. So we as a kid, we always felt that a little bit above those guys, and that's not the way, because God bless them, they were doing their mission too. But they went like something like this. From the ring around his eyeball, you could tell a bombardier. And you can tell a bomber pilot by the spreading of his rear. And you can tell a navigator by his sextant maps and such. And you can tell a fighter pilot, but you can't tell him much. So that's that little.
That says it pretty nicely. Well, I also, if we could advance to this next slide, Ashley, I want to continue just rolling off a couple of questions. And PJ, this is, you know this well, you and Pete and everybody in the early days, including Lee Northrup's help getting the museum around, all the way up to today, the board, the people that organize reunions, the hundreds of people. We're going to continue to stay active. I want to thank Mark Engleman, who put together a plan to help us go out and find third and fourth generation members of the 475th. And we've come up with at least 3,000 names of people out throughout the US and the world that are family members who, most people, one of our questions was, my grandfather didn't like to talk about this. And I think that's a characteristic of the greatest generation. They didn't want to talk about their exploits. The war was behind all of you, and now it was time to build your life and start again. But having the ability to connect and keep these stories alive is our mission. It's the mission of the Pearl Harbor Aviation Museum, and it's one of the reasons that we partnered together and have a display and an exhibit there and have active roles on the board. We also have a museum in Seattle with the Museum of Flight, which has an unbelievable collection. I think Jack Purdy's P-38, and then right here in Chino, California, at the Plains of Fame. And those of you in Southern California owe it to yourself to take a peek at this collection, as well as all the aircraft there. PJ, this is the 23 Skidoo, which you aptly named. What is the storyline behind that name?
After I got out of flying school and did RPU, getting the P-38s out of Edwards Air Force Base, that's my Chihuahua.
That's somebody's on your tail. Your wingman's not doing their job. Go ahead.
Yeah, right. And I was flying. I went to a little town called Tumwater. They had 3 squadrons of P-38s up in Washington. One was in Tumwater, Washington, out by the capital, Olympia. And I picked up my dad. I lived in Mercer Island, Washington, which is right in Seattle. And I took him down one day to take a look at the airplanes where I was stationed. And it was on a Sunday. And 38 came zooming through maybe 300 feet, going like hell, right over us, turned and banked around. And all I heard my dad say was 23 Skidoo. And I said, I asked him, what the hell is that? And it turns out that was a slang operation in New York City. There was a street, 23rd Street, and on it was a church. And the young men after church would sit out there where the young ladies would come out, and they had to walk down about 3 steps to get to the 23rd Avenue. And the young men were just standing there because the young ladies would lift up their skirts to show their ankles as they're going down there. And a policeman came by, according to the rumor, whatever it was, and said 23 Skidoo, and told all the young men, get moving, don't clog the place. And so that's where 23 Skidoo came from.
Well, it's a very apt name, and it has served you well, all 4 versions of it, even though I think you had Doggone It was one of the names, using your name on the nose art. And if I can ask Ashley, can you show can I get on camera for a second? It's not because of me, but I don't know that if my camera's on. I want to.
Oh yeah, you've been on this entire time.
Can we start over then? Oh, okay. Listen, this is one of my favorite shirts I wear, but it's a P-40, and PJ has already put it in its rightful place, because P-40s, of course, were important in the earliest days, especially for the Flying Tigers and General Chennault. But this is not appropriate for our wonderful conversation with PJ. So this P-40 this shirt's going. I'm going to give you the shirt off my back if you'll give us an email and help us continue to grow what we're doing with the 475th and at the Pearl Harbor Aviation Museum. We have our own merchandise, and we have at least 2 of these left. This wonderful P-38 Satan's Angels shirt. Let's go to the next slide, if you don't mind, Ashley, as we see if there's any additional questions. PJ, this picture will live in infamy. You have your 23 Skidoo And you're showing a little ankle, I might add. It's maybe a lot of ankles there. That's pretty good. But PJ, what would you say to younger people today? Well, I don't know what this war was about, but why would I want to go into flight school? You had a great response to a question like that. What would you say to them?
Well, I guess when you say flight school, I'm assuming you're talking about getting in the military. Is that right, as a pilot?
Yes, it is. Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Well, all I can tell you is, what better deal can you get than to go into a school where the government will pay for you to go to training and teach you how to fly an airplane, and you go in the military and they do like so many did. You got many choices. You can, for example, if you go to the Air Force Academy, after you graduate from the Air Force Academy, you go to flying school. You only have to stay in the military, Air Force, for 5 years. Put in 5 years' time, and you can go from there into the airlines and fly with airlines. If you want to stay in, as I did, you stay in for all these different things, and by the time you get out, I got out when I was young enough where I retired the Florida Keys. I bought a big old sports fishing boat on the canal, and I went fishing and hunting, and I even took on another little job with a marine supply outfit. So bingo, it's you talk about freebies and you talk about fun and experience, and there's no thrill like getting up into the wild blue.
Yonder. Well, I think we know that you served your country well. You and Bobby had many adventures after your duties in Vietnam and in Korea before that. But one story that sticks in our minds is you have something to do with Maintenance Day, and also a little song that's sort of a tribute to your fellow fallen 475th pilots. So maybe you could wrap us up with that story. Sorry.
One thing they had when we were over in World War II, over in New Guinea, we had what they call a maintenance day, and that would be when the commander would say there's no flying tomorrow, and all the airplanes would stand down for maintenance, getting repaired, back in shape. And for the night before, we were always authorized a shot of whiskey after every mission. And I flew 187 missions, so we had a lot of the other guys. We wouldn't take the shot right after our mission. We had them collected by the flight surgeon. Then on a maintenance day, when we knew we didn't have to fly the next day, out broke and all the booze, and we mix it with, if you can believe it, grapefruit powder and water, and we'd drink that stuff, and we would sing all the songs, the words of which are not for mixed company. Let me set it that way. And I played the ukulele, but my older sister, she's 6 years old, showed me how to play the ukulele, and I played the ukulele so the blood was pouring out my fingers. But anyway, the next day, when we knew we didn't have to fly, we sang all kinds of songs. And so I'm not going to sing this thing, but I'll give you some of the lyrics. It goes something like this. By a New Guinea waterfall, one bright and sunny day, beside his shattered P-38, this young pursuiter lay. Now his parachute hung from a nearby tree, and he was not yet quite dead. So listen to the very last words this fighter pilot said. Now I'm going to a better land where everything is right, where whiskey grows on telegraph poles and play poker every night. There's not a single thing to do but sit around and sing, and all our crews are women. Oh, death, where is thy sting? That's not very good.
Well, PJ, I have to say on behalf of the Pearl Harbor Aviation Museum, on behalf of the 475th, behalf of all service men and women who have sacrificed, and mostly to a dear, dear friend. And I have told people this analogy, and I'm so not alone when I say my privilege of being able to chat with you is like a boyhood dream chiding with his favorite baseball player. You know, I was born
mean,
5 years. I was born 5 years too late to be a fighter pilot, but that's not the point. And I know you'd rather interrupt me, and I'm going to let you because you have rank.
Well, I appreciate that, Brad. I know we're running short on time and everything, and I just want to congratulate Ashley.
Yes.
For people who don't know, I'm sure just about everybody have been to over there where the Navy has such a beautiful layout with Arizona and all that. And Ford there has been neglected, and Ashley and company has come along there, and they're putting that thing together, that aeronautic museum, and they're getting a lot of airplanes. And listen, if what they need, they got to have a P-38 there. Now, yes. I know they're available around this country. I also know it costs $1 million or $2. But if just in case the president of Firestone or something is listening, or like a nice little write-off, maybe he'd like we can find the airplane for him.
Yes.
God bless you, Ashley, for what you're doing, and it's a privilege to do this, even though I had to put up with Brad's remarks.
Well, that's so did everybody, and I know Ashley knows that her boss, Alyssa Lyons, who has been the spirit as well of what you just described, is not only listening, she's grinning from ear to ear, because she's going to work together with us with the 475th, and we're going to find that 38, so we can be sure that the people that come to that museum, which is a significant number every year, has a chance to kind of not only know what the aircraft was like, but the role it played. And if we'd advance to the final slide here, Ashley, this would be great. And there we go. Whoops, not so quick. There we go. There's PJ again, ladies and gentlemen. And
may I interrupt one more? I'm sorry, Brad.
No, absolutely, please.
Ashley, we do have the capability of finding a young man who knows everybody that can put together a P-38 such as they have at the P-38 association. So if we won't have any problems locating that guy. I have to go through some sources. The guy retired up there in some place in the mountains, but that's an option, you know, because this thing, it looks so real. I went up with wanted to open up one of the Zeus fasteners, and it was just painted on there. So it's really, really a good airplane. Okay, that's all I got to say. Goodbye.
PJ,
what do you say?
PJ, mahalo, and we want to thank again Ashley, your team, all of the members of the 475th, and the great team at the Pearl Harbor Aviation Museum. Thank you everyone for your questions. I know we didn't get nearly close to answering all of them, but PJ, you covered such great personal stories. And the last thing we'll say is that this has been recorded, and I think we have everyone's email addresses. So if you're interested, I think a link could be provided, and you can share it with your friends. So Ashley, I'll turn the mic back over to you so everyone can say great.
Oh my goodness, you guys are so sweet, and I'm sure everyone is with me when I say mahalo to you both. It has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you, Brad, for your expertise. And of course, Colonel Dahl, a profound mahalo to you, not only for your service, but your irreplaceable insight on this world. And, you know, it's really, really lovely to hear stories from the past in such a humble way. We don't get to hear that a lot, and not every day. So it has been an experience for all of us, and I know Brad will back me up for that.
No question.
But I really do want to thank our viewers today for coming by and staying throughout the entire program. We did go over, but that's just because we had so much participation and so many questions come in. This will be available on our YouTube channel. It will be uploaded this weekend. So if you would like to stop by and rewatch and send it out to your friends, please do. Thank you so much for supporting our museum. It really is you that keeps us going, especially during these hard times. So mahalo, mahalo, and we will see you next time. Thank you so much. Bye.